Welcome to Business Line's State of the Economy podcast, where you'll find insight, analysis, and the story behind the numbers.
Hello, friends. Welcome to today's episode of Business Line's State of Economy podcast. I am Amiti Sen. Last month, the news of Hong Kong and Singapore recalling certain spice mixes exported by two Indian companies on account of ethylene oxide or ETO contamination generated a lot of concern amongst consumers, industry, and policymakers. Since then, news of other countries such as the US, Australia, and New Zealand increasing their scrutiny on Indian spices has been coming in. ETO, which is used as a sterilizing agent in spices, is feared to be carcinogenic when used beyond certain limits. All this action led the Spices Board of India, which is the central organization for the development and worldwide promotion of Indian spices, to come up with the requirement of mandatory certification on ETO content for all spices being exported to Hong Kong and Singapore. It also came up with guidelines on ETO for Indian spice exporters sending shipments to all markets across the world. In this episode, we'll try to cut out some of this noise and find out what is the problem actually about. India is one of the leading exporters of spices. So why is there so much concern on quality and safety now? Are things being blown out of proportion, or do we have a real problem at hand? I have with me today Mohit Singla, an expert on agriculture exports, who will throw more light on nuances of the matter. Mr. Singla is also the chairman of the Trade Promotion Council of India, a trade and investment promotion body under the Department of Commerce. Welcome, Mr. Singla.
Thank you so much, Amiti.
Mr. Singla, to start off with, how significant do you think is the incident of recall of certain Indian spices by Hong Kong and Singapore? Should India be worried about it?
Well, Amiti, India is a very, very well-known land of spices, or probably I would say spice bowl of the world. We are the largest producer, consumer, and exporter of quality spices globally. And our spices are known for variety and flavor and strong association with culinary heritage. We are a very, very credible supplier and producer, and we have been able to supply this spice as a product to the world for many, many ages. Now, I am not in a specific position to comment on the merits of the recent incident between certain players in Hong Kong and Singapore, but definitely this kind of activity, this kind of a noise within the media and the regulatory framework is a matter of concern for the brand, for the suppliers, and for the overall economy as such.
Right. It appears that the US too had recalled some Indian spices over the recent past, especially after this news on Hong Kong and Singapore came in. Past cases in the US too are now being written about. So was that for a similar reason?
Amiti, MRL related issues can come up from time to time in the domain of food trade, primarily for pesticide and veterinary drug residues. It's not just restricted to spices. We should see that there are instances of recalls in case of food exports globally. So whether or it's not just restricted to US, to any other economy, any trading partner, Saudi, Australia, EU, UK. So every country has their own regulatory framework, have their own minimum residue level standards, have their own understanding of food security, have their own bills of food security. So it keeps, and it's also not very constant, it keeps on changing. So if today US probably has a certain limit on a MRL on a certain product, probably tomorrow they can change it, they can reduce it, or they can increase it. It also depends on the changing climate scenario, changing requirements, new findings, new scientific regulations. So I would say, currently US allows ETO as a sterilizing agent in spices. The American Spice Trade Association recently clarified that ETO is currently permitted for spice treatment in US. So I would say that happened in Hong Kong.
I think they even wrote to FSSAI saying that it is permitted and it should be allowed.
It is permitted, and it has always, no container exported to US has ever been sent back, because the MRL limits prescribed by US FDA are very well managed by Indian exporters, and is contrary to what has actually happened in Hong Kong and in Singapore.
Right. So at this point, Mr. Singla, could you please explain to our listeners what MRL actually is, because we keep reading about it. So, and how can exporters ensure that these MRLs are met?
MRL, or maximum residue limit, are regulatory standards laid down by all countries for food products. So they stipulate the maximum quantity of a permissible residue. So if I put it in a layman's language, any chemical compound, how much quantity of that compound is permitted per kg of the food product is defined by a common term called MRL. The general principle is that such residue must be as low as possible to ensure safety for consumers. However, the food containing residues above the MRL are not inherently unsafe as long as they are calculated acute reference dose and has not been exceeded. So MRLs are set at very, very, very low levels to ensure that consumers are at the highest level of safety. And every country decides what chemical compounds should be contained within the MRL limits, and they are specified from time to time. Exporters should be alert of these regulations to the countries that they are exporting to, because countries keep on publishing this data on their food security websites, on their customs websites. And as I said earlier, every country has a different framework, different chemical compounds, and different requirements, different limits. So exporters have to be really aware of what they are sending, which country to which they are sending, and what are the regulations, so that the pre-testing can be done to avoid such issues.
Right, that's a very important point you made. So the Spices Board has now mandated compulsory testing for spices exported to Hong Kong and Singapore. So how will that work out for exporters?
In my opinion, the Spices Board has been a very, very responsible organization, has been doing ETO testing ever since. India is already a part of Alimentarius Codex, which is the international food standard framework under the food organization in Rome, International Food Organization. So Spice Board probably has come up with another amendment, with another development, another circular only for Hong Kong and Singapore, probably at this moment to douse off the recent issue. But Spice Board has always been very, very proactive in testing ETOs and other contaminations, other MRLs as a pre-testing measure for all exports of spices originating from India.
Right. So I was reading about it. So such testing, this compulsory certification, ETO certification is already mandatory for exports to the UK and the EU, right? I mean, this has already happened. So there is already a system in place.
It has always been there, Spice Board as a prerequisite, but also as a part of the G2G commitment, government to government commitment. So red chili or any product containing traces of red chili, where red chili is used as a part of the recipe or as a whole or as a blend, it is tested for ETO as a mandatory requirement of EU and UK. That apart, like for example, UK, you also require a few more tests such as aflatoxin, Sudan dye, or pesticide residue 9. So there are other, so as I already said, that different countries have different requirements for different chemicals. But ETO for red chili has always been an MRL issue with EU, UK. And Spice Board has been very diligently testing all control samples, issuing the good to go certificate, and only then the consignments are exported.
Right. So is it possible or even required to have testing mandate for spices exports to all markets? So if you make it compulsory, will it increase costs for exporters?
Of course, there is an increase in cost, there is increase in complexity, there is increase in time and delays, because there are added layers to procedures when an exporter is already in a hurry of complying with the deadline of an order. And in between, you have this complexity of taking control samples, sending them to the prescribed labs. Labs also have a turnaround time to test and come back with the certificate. Those certificates are uploaded on the official framework websites. So, of course, it is a cost to an exporter. And you would be amazed to know that the Central Insecticide Board has registered over 295 pesticides, and out of which 139 are used in spices. I would say that if a more optimal strategy is followed as per the market requirement sensitiveness, it is really getting more and more complex. And really, an exporter has to go through a lot of hardships and monetary loss to comply with these regulations. And for sure, there has to be some way or the other, some unification, some standardization that has to come in the future to make things easier for exporters of all the it's a global problem. It's not just India, it's a global problem. So any exporter probably exporting from US will have to face the similar problems when they're exporting to India to comply to Indian standards. Or we go completely organic, as in the case of Sri Lanka, but it is not a very proactive, it is not a very productive move, I would say, because their food exports took a major hit, and the productivity went very low, and therefore the market had to deal with a huge economic blow. So I would say that a uniform MRL code and a uniform approach globally would be a more beneficial approach to look at it.
I think the Spices Board is also trying to do something like that. It's approached Codex to come up with MRL for ETO, which could be, accepted all over. So I think Spices Board is making effort on its part. So you already mentioned how robust the Indian spice industry is. So how has India been performing in the global market for spices in the recent years? And how important do you think it is for India to address these concerns on quality, whenever they come up, to ensure that growth is steady?
Well, very important point at this junction, Amiti. If you would be amazed and happy to know that in the year 23-24, the spice exports have seen a very strong positive growth, almost 12.5%, and now it is at a level of $4.25 billion. Just in the last year itself, the capsicum witnessed a 25.9% year-on-year growth, cumin seeds at 23.1% year-on-year growth, and our favorite chili powder, which is facing the ETO lash, has experienced a 29.8% year-on-year growth. I think it's a stellar at almost 30%. Our coriander seeds have seen 80% year-on-year growth. So as we can see in the trends in the data that almost every spice is increasing in a double-digit numbers. The spice overall spice exports has been very robust. We've seen a $4.25 billion export, which is a very positive number. And almost every Indian market, major market such as US, Saudi, UK, and UAE, every market is witnessing a positive upward growth trend. It's a very positive signal that I can see at the moment for Indian spices.
Oh, those numbers are really encouraging. So, Mr. Singla, my final question to you, it's a generic one. So, how are India's agriculture exports faring overall in terms of quality and SPS norms of other countries, especially the Western countries? Do we see an improvement happening there, or are things becoming more difficult?
Well, Amiti, India has always been very stringent and has set very high norms for MRLs for different food products and pesticides based on risk assessments. India was at the forefront of initiating a proposal for new committee for spices and culinary herbs under the Codex Alimentarius, which formulates the internationally acceptable standards on food in 2012. So you would see almost 13 years ago, India aligned itself with the international codex testing and standards parameters. So India is not a laid back country when it comes to food security and food safety. And we've been very actively doing this for many years, more than a decade now. And we have seen very lower instances of recalls of food products on MRLs. So if you see the data, you would be very amazed to see that, sometimes it just gets blown by media way too much, like this time it happened. But India's recall of containers of food products, including spices, from all the major markets, the instances of recall are extremely low. It clearly indicates great awareness and improvements in the ecosystem. I would not say we are 100% resolved. We are 100% clean, 100% traceable. And as we discussed earlier, the entire food chain from farm to packing to transportation to grading to processing and to packing, final packing. It requires a great sense of traceability. It requires a great sense of willingness to be more and more clear and to be more and more responsible. And I think India has done a phenomenal job, and the testimony is that very low rate of return of containers. You consider the case of rice in India, which involves millions and millions of farmers with small land holdings. It's a huge task, and if you see our exports to the major markets are growing year on year, despite the MRL standards being so low. There is the best practices established by Codex are very well adopted in India, and I feel that India is doing fairly well in this scenario.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Singla, for sparing your precious time and sharing your expertise with our listeners. Well, your lucid explanation has increased our understanding of the complex matter substantially. Thank you so much again.
Thank you so much, Amiti. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you so much.